Tonight on Gangs of Oz, organised crime Asian style. From the Triads to the 5T Gang, the untold story of Southeast Asian gangs, whose tentacles stretch into drug importation, kidnapping and extortion.
Stop right there! Stop!
Drug distribution and the most amazing Asian takeaway of all. How they managed to get billions, yes, billions of black money out of the country.
Asian crime syndicates are particularly challenging for law enforcement to investigate. Culturally, we are very different, and Asian crime groups have a different culture unto themselves.
He was bound tightly with his hands behind his back. He was never fed. At one stage, he was given half a glass of water. He was constantly abused and physically assaulted.
Also, Australia's biggest ever heroin bust, and all in Prada bags.
And once we had a look inside the Prada bags, there were 1,104 blocks of number 4 high-grade heroin.
And the inside story of the murder of one of Australia's most loved citizens. The 70s saw a boom in Asian migration. Family reunions and the arrival of Vietnamese migrants following the war has seen a vibrant and thriving Asian community grow in Australia. However, language and cultural barriers sometimes create closed communities where crime can flourish in a cloak of secrecy. According to police, Asian crime has its own distinctive footprint.
Extortion, blackmail, kidnapping, home raids, human slavery, people trafficking, narcotics, and this comes from a long history in the Chinese culture or Asian culture.
Big Australian cities all have Chinatowns. That Chinese communities have always been close is a matter of cultural comfort. It makes them strong, and it makes them targets. Asian crime gangs, for the most part, had operated in the shadows, until the high-profile death of a hero made front-page news across the country.
The murder of Dr. Victor Chang was the outcome of a plan between a group of criminals, Asian criminals, who targeted a prominent and what they believed to be a wealthy citizen for the purpose of extorting money from the victim.
Task Force Oak, a unit specialising in Asian crime, is also investigating the possibility that Dr. Chang may have been the victim of an extortion attempt by Asian criminals interested in his lucrative surgical practice. His death, perhaps, setting a gruesome example.
Charming, brilliant, awarded, Victor Chang was an Australian hero, a pioneer. Victor Chang became famous for running the heart transplant program at St Vincent's Hospital. His profile and his race made him a target for the traditional triad crime of extortion. This was a crime planned in Asia, targeting prominent Asian Australians.
The principal offender was a very well-known criminal. He was a career criminal in Malaysia. And by selecting Dr. Chang, they believed that they had an easy mark to make some money by kidnapping and extorting money from Dr. Chang.
The plan was simple and shocking. It was a crime that stunned the nation.
That these criminals targeted Dr. Chang from his home, followed him from his home on his way to St Vincent's Hospital, where they staged a motor vehicle accident. Dr. Chang pulled to the side of the road with the offending vehicle pulling him behind him. When he alighted from the vehicle, he was confronted by the two criminals. The bottom line was that they expected to extort $10 million. They were going to return to the house, hold the family to ransom. We found a number of items, including lengths of rope, and if Dr. Chang did not cooperate, they were prepared to hang members of the family from the house to show that they meant business.
At this point, Victor Chang need not have died, even after being shot at close range.
The biggest tragedy of the whole incident, if I could say that, was that the first shot was at close range to Dr. Chang's forehead. The bullet glanced off the side of his head and went under the skin and exited behind his ear. That first shot would have knocked Dr. Chang out. He was unconscious and he fell to the ground. But otherwise, when he regained consciousness, he would have been okay. But again, the tragedy was that the killer, while he was laying on the roadway, placed the weapon against his forehead again and fired a second shot. And that was the fatal shot. It was just so needless and pointless and a terrible, tragic waste of life.
Chang's death was devastating. The normally secretive Asian crime gangs were now very much in the spotlight. Police also got an early breakthrough.
There was a wallet still lying on the footpath.
It eventually led them to Chu Seng Lu, a career criminal who'd already spent 11 years in jail.
Some of these groups specialise in varying criminal activities, whether it be armed robbery, murder, extortion, kidnapping.
What followed was a remarkable piece of interstate and international detective work. In Melbourne, police were watching Chu Seng Lu and his offsider at the precise moment when Chu Seng Lu revealed he had left his wallet at the scene.
When you see that photograph, that jumps out at you. The shock and horror on Lim's face and the concern on Chen Seng Lu's face, I think sums it all up.
Chu Seng Lu was arrested on his way to Melbourne Airport. Lim slipped through the net, but was later arrested in Malaysia.
That sums up the whole enterprise, that they put a lot of time and effort into it, but really it was never ever going to come off. And that's the worst part of this whole tragedy, that it was just a needless, wasted life and of such a man.
It wasn't long before Asian crime gangs struck again. Once more, the target was a member of the Asian community. Once more, extortion was the name of the game. Barbecue King is a well-known restaurant that stays open late. It's a local institution and a Chinatown landmark. Philip Chow owns the Barbecue King with Robert Ho, a man they call the Mayor of Chinatown.
Philip had finished trading at his restaurant at the Barbecue King in the city, and he was on his way back to his car when he was confronted by three men and bundled away into another car and taken off the street.
This was a very high-profile kidnapping. It wasn't long before police discovered the motive.
Philip was taken for ransom. He was kidnapped for a substantial amount of money. There was a number of threats made by the kidnappers in relation to Philip's safety. First priority was to try and alleviate the anger that was floating around from these criminals and try and keep Philip safe.
Robert Ho, Philip's business partner, was the conjugate for the calls. Calls now recorded by the police.
Part of the problem with this investigation was the language barrier, not only between us and the family, but also between the kidnappers and the family. Mr. Chow speaks Cantonese, the kidnappers spoke Mandarin. That compounded the problems that we experienced during the investigation. Whilst those were occurring, police facilitated the collection of the money in order to use that to secure the safe release of Philip Chow.
Philip Chow was being held captive in an apartment a few kilometres from the city.
He was bound tightly with his hands behind his back. He was never fed. At one stage he was given half a glass of water. He was constantly abused and physically assaulted.
The kidnappers were barely keeping him alive. At one point, he managed to untie himself and make a run for the door.
He was aware he was very high up in a multi-storey unit, so he couldn't use the window. So he made a run for the front door, where he was grabbed by two of the kidnappers, savagely beaten for his troubles, rebound even tighter than before, and thrown back into that same single bedroom. The whole resources of the New South Wales Police were made available to us to investigate this matter. It is probably the highest priority investigation that can occur in policing. We had full resources of all our covert surveillance sections, of our tactical police, our negotiating police, our specific Asian crime squad. We had everything available within the police department. Whilst Robert Ho was in contact with the kidnappers, they made a number of demands on how the exchange would take place. The money was placed in a sports bag.
With a $600,000 ransom, Robert Ho was instructed to get into his car and start driving. Closely monitored by the police surveillance team, the race to rescue Philip Chow was on.
Robert went to that area and he was directed over the next nearly 2 hours to attend a number of locations.
The waiting game and traffic chaos began as Robert Ho receives directions on his mobile phone.
He was eventually told to go to a club.
The police undercover and surveillance operatives were one step ahead at all times.
He was directed into the toilet cubicle and told to leave the bag there. Robert followed the instructions of the kidnapper and